Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Peter Stuart. Peter is, I just had it pulled up, he's the co-founder of Velora Digital, which I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about, and we just met yesterday. So yeah, Peter, thanks for coming on the show, man. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me on, Paul.
Yeah. Kind of, if you could just set the stage a little bit, just tell the audience a little bit just about your background, your career and background in, journalism. Kind of a different trajectory than some of the folks who come on this show, but yeah, I'd like to just set the stage like that.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I've been in sort of journalism and writing for 20 years since I was a student. And yeah, originally sort of was a feature writer in the print world and magazine world. I wrote for some kind of newspapers and then sort of a few kind of feature magazines and ended up settling into cycling as my specialty. So I worked for a cycling magazine called Cyclist. That was a wonderful gig. It was mostly geared around cyclotourism. So a lot of my assignments for the month would be go to Tahiti and write an article about how nice it is to cycle there. That was a pretty sweet gig. And, back then, the early days of print, you might only have 2 pieces of work to do for a month. And while I worked very hard, it was not the kind of intense deadline pressure you might have from a lot of other gigs in journalism. So, I worked there for a long time in the good heydays of magazine print work. Then moved on to an independent magazine, very, very arty, called Velora. I sort of kickstarted their digitalization, kind of really worked to transform the magazine into more of a kind of website product as well. And then after that, I became the editor of the world's biggest cycling website called Cycling News. And I was there for 4 years until I decided to, kind of lose my mind and go for this project and quit my job on a whim. But so during my time at Cycling News, we were sort of seeing, sort of finished in the autumn of 2025. I was seeing like the kind of emergence of AI technology and also kind of increasing commonness of AI content. And from like a perspective of looking at the competitive landscape of other sites emerging kind of from nowhere, or just kind of actually like threats from the likes of Google having, introducing AI overviews and things like that. And I began to think it'd be interesting to really think about what content and journalism and publishing is going to look like in 2026, 2027, 2030. And I sort of was fascinated with the idea of how a media company that built in AI from scratch would look and how it would basically try and capitalize on AI technology to make a more efficient and ultimately, ideally, better process. So I was working away at Cycling News, and I was leading a 15-person editorial team, so it was pretty much no free time at all. But occasionally in the evening before bed, I'd hammer out some ideas about how to build a sort of like some sort of content pipeline that would automate a lot of the heavy lift of journalism. In speaking to some friends about that, I kind of reconnected with an old friend who was an AI specialist, my co-founder Danny Bellion, and we got talking about what would this look like and how would I upskill. Danny sort of met me a few times, and on the second time of meeting, he was telling me all the stuff I'd have to learn, but then was like, I actually know how to do all this stuff, so I can just kind of do it for you, and like basically you'd have the tech side, and I'm kind of up for it. So I've got an opportunity at work for now at the moment. Do you want to just take the leap? I was kind of like not planning to quit my job that day, but I sort of decided that, YOLO. So I went for it and I decided to go full bore on this project. And that was back in November of 2025. And so we basically set off on this project. I left my kind of editorship role, which was, Biddy, I really loved the team there, but I was quite excited about this new challenge and began working on what AI kind of publishing, what it looks like, what you can do with AI in terms of building better products on the front end and what you can do with AI in terms of like automating, the content production process. And I tried to be as open-minded about this as possible and really, understand what it's going to look like. And so we kind of effectively built a whole platform just to power our one site that we launched, which is called Velora Cycling, which was basically powered by this AI pipeline and AI code base that we developed. And the goal was to think, okay, what tools do we use? Where do we use these tools? How do they improve the product? How do they make the process better? How do they generally make journalism easier, ideally, and like more creative, less manual lift? And that was kind of, from the outset, was my real goal, because I'm sure lots of the editors and writers that listen to your podcast will know a huge amount of time spent, especially with digital publishing, is extremely menial data entry type work, populating articles on a CMS. It doesn't add anything creative to the internet. It's just a case of being, okay, I have to find an image, I have to add some alt text, I have to tag this, to this specific theme, I have to add these internal links. So removing that stuff was a massive part of it. But then also thinking, okay, well, if we're going to talk about AI in journalism, AI in content, what else in the workflow isn't is really something that AI can sort of creep into and like, well, not creep into, but, AI can start to, become part of, become intrinsic in. What can it do better? What can it do quicker? Or what can it do without sacrificing editorial autonomy? And we sort of went on that journey and started to explore where those boundaries sit and how we ultimately get good editorial products using AI from scratch. And we believe we've done that really pretty well. And we launched the product, and quite quickly after launching, we kind of intended to build a tiny little publisher, but with a few titles. But quite quickly, a few people approached us saying, "This is amazingly cool, this platform. How did you do this? How are you running this whole website by yourself? All these touch points, like social media accounts, a newsletter, multiple stories a day, and you obviously all the tech at the website itself." And we sort of started speaking to people about the process behind it. And then we kind of realized that the real product might be the platform rather than the websites we'd launch. So we developed the platform as a user-facing B2B platform, and we started opening it up to a small number of publishers to trial with us. And that's kind of where we're at now. We're a bit bigger now, so we have a few dozen people on the platform, but we're still kind of trying to, in a controlled way, expand to a few more titles and a few more use cases. And we're kind of excited to see what the next step looks like.
Cool. Yeah, I have some questions from in there, but
Uh-huh.
I also think for the folks watching, I was just going to ask, walk us through, what does this actually look like? How does it work? And we talked before, if you want to do a screen share for the people watching, and if you're listening, you can go find this on YouTube and take a look. Can you kind of just walk through the dashboard, the kind of core functionalities? You talked about how it takes a lot off of an editor or a reporter's plate, like a digital reporter. And you showed me some of that yesterday, but yeah, if you want to, you should be able to share the screen there and just kind of walk us through some of it, because it's really cool. Yeah.
Okay, if you can see that. So that's our
Yep.
analytics right now. As I said to you on the call yesterday, we're still early days in this journey. So the sessions I used to have, 200,000 sessions a day. Now it's 700 to 1,000.
Right.
So, but, we're a smaller product, but this isn't a bit editorial team. But yeah, analytics sits in here. And probably the coolest thing, place to start is this kind of home kind of dashboard that I have, which is my kind of newsroom briefing each morning. And this just tells me what I should be interested in based on the kind of sources of information that we have kind of plugged into this platform. It does this really, really well. It's kind of, I don't follow up on all these stories largely because of time, and I also don't want to just publish too much content. But this really hits on what are the major talking points in cycling in our specific audience today, which is really interesting. It also kind of looks at kind of incidental stories that aren't being covered so prominently, and it also pitches features at me. It says, "Here's a feature idea. Do you want to run with this?" Which is really cool. This is all kind of like the trimming of what is ultimately the engine of the platform, which is a kind of a news discovery service. Now, I don't know how much people use kind of Google Alerts or RSS feeds, but in my previous job, we didn't actually initially, it wasn't the standard practice just to say, okay, you're a newsroom, here's your tech setup. But when you start to play around with the stuff, you start to see that there's so much automation that you can take advantage of in terms of just having a lot of source kind of checking, a lot of kind of news discovery very, very quickly, and in a way that means that you're able to survey a much wider, cast the net much more widely into multiple languages, multiple territories, multiple sources of information. So you'll see on this dashboard, you've got basically RSS feeds of various international news press, but we also have Google Alerts in here. We have sort of some just brand sites, and we can also survey specific web pages, or for UK companies, we can also pull in their company's house data. So if they file new accounts or they have confirmation statements or appoint new directors, we can see that change in real time, and it will alert us if the platform thinks it's newsworthy. Beyond that, we also have my email inbox being fed through, and that will similarly be kind of ranked and kind of assessed for newsworthiness. And we also have a whole bunch of Twitter feeds that we can, and all social feeds that we can monitor basically. And we can use Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit. All these platforms are available to effectively feed in more and more sources and more information. How it kind of acts on that information is that the tool that we have is effectively geared to each publication which onboards to the platform, and it will then rank stories effectively by what the platform believes to be the most interesting stories in the pipeline. in this kind of whole batch of a huge number of stories. And it might be looking at hundreds of stories an hour, but it's able to understand, okay, this specific story is of interest to your audience, so you should pay this more attention. So we kind of assess this by newsworthiness score and uniqueness score. So we don't want stories that have been serviced many, many times in the feed or have been serviced by us before. But ultimately, we want stories that really speak to our specific audience engagement priority. And this stuff is, again, kind of compiled automatically by the platform. It looks at your site and it understands what is likely to be your audience's profile, what's likely to be your engagement profile. It's super good at this. It generally is like, we tried lots of ways of customizing how this engagement profile be built, but effectively an AI just looking at the site and going through quite a specific kind of agentic process is the best way of doing it. So yeah, all this information is then fed to this visibility kind of news discovery dashboard. But then when it hits that critical point, as you can see, this one has a score of 3, threshold is 2.4. It will then move through to our news dashboard here. And this is where articles are effectively put that are considered to be kind of high interest, high engagement for us. And where we can review, okay, is this something we want to take through to a story, or is this something we want to research more? Is this a lead we want to follow? And yeah, I could take this as an example. This is news that someone, Matteo Jorgensen, has just broken his arm. So that will have just happened in a race. I think that was actually on Sunday. So that's saying that it's confirmed that he's been ruled out of the race, as the surgery was successful, but he's out. Now, what's happened here is that, like, while we have a source, so there's one source that came through Google, the platform's conducted a sort of customized deep research on the topic, and it's gone away to understand what's the broader picture. It doesn't just rely on one source. It will then understand what's the story here, what's interesting. This is kind of an abridged version of that research kind of process. And if you go through to a writing process, it will then present a more in-depth version of this research. So if I was to write this story, I'll show you kind of what the manual workflow looks like first, and then I can go through more of the automatic process. So if you say write manually, what effectively will happen in this tab here is that we'll have like a deep research, that deep research kind of rewritten here for our reference point. So it would say, here's all the sources, here's what the research has found, here's what your article should be about, and you can just write the story as you want to. So broke his arm. But the reason that I like this manual writing platform is that it effectively uses AI as a co-writer and editor. So if I select this, it will say, hey, do you want to challenge that perspective? Do you want to fact check that perspective? Do you want to strengthen it? So here I'll say strengthen, and then this little AI agent over here runs away and says, okay, what's this guy talking about? Yeah, this isn't good. You need to work on that bit of copy. That's not up to scratch. Obviously, it's just an example, but I find this really interesting from my perspective because when I was, since the advent of ChatGPT and stuff, I've kind of always thought it was interesting as a co-writer and as a challenger, because we can't live with an editor sitting next to us. So often I'd write something, I'd be like, does this like sit right? Does it smell right? And I just kind of put it in and say, what do you think? Is there something missing here? And I've always thought these tools are very good for that challenge and that pushback. And so finding myself doing that, I thought it was really interesting to put that into the platform as like one of the native kind of features of it. Now, there's some stuff that might be like more kind of programmatic, like in nature as content. So this came through as a press release, for instance. That one's already been written, but we'll just take this one, for instance, as a story. I'm probably going to take that one specifically. I'll just try to find an appropriate story to get a nice lead. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. This is like Chris Froome recreated if you might know, he had to run up a climb one time because his bike broke. So it's quite a funny story, but quite low lift. And really all we need to do there is have a drafted version that talks about the incident and talks about the social media post he did. So in this case, I'll just hit write, and we can tell the agent to do a sort of draft that would be a starting point. Now, like, obviously not all stories lend themselves to that, but in a lot of cases you might say AI drafted version is a really great place to begin. And at this point, as you'll see, a bunch of different AI tools will spark up and begin the whole process that takes the article through to a CMS ready to publish piece of content. That'll take about 5 minutes. But when it's finished, it would look something more like this, which is, the AI tool has found a really good image to match the story, because this is from the race that was being questioned. It's referenced all the leads. Again, I'd go in and probably work on this a fair bit more if we were going to publish it.
Right.
But the really cool thing about it is that if you're seeing this is already fully built in our CMS, so I don't have to do anything else here aside from editing the copy. It has an image, it has an SEO field, it has all the metadata, it has all the tagged relevant stuff, and it's in the right taxonomy and all that. So that's why I like it. I just don't feel that like that's a super good use of my time to have written this in a Google Doc and then poured it all over to here and, put the headline in the headline field, the excerpt in the excerpt field. So that's kind of a look at the kind of news process. But in this journey, we also wanted to look at how writing could be made better and easier for like longer form stuff equally with AI tools. And so we also developed this kind of source board, which is where we can put raw kind of information, raw audio, PDFs, like documents, and we can use this as a starting point to plan an article or to draft an article. So I dragged in a random document that I just dragged that in like 20 minutes before this call, from a call I had a few weeks ago that led to a story. And then the tools automatically transcribed this, and it's understood which speaker was which, and sort of kind of done some initial research and analysis. And then I can make a note to say, sweat sensors are legal in competition. Start on that point. And I could do loads and loads of post-it notes and whatnot. And then I can effectively kind of map out an initial plan of what the article looks like. I can either do it like ask the tool to write it from scratch, or I can sort of go into what's called this write interactive field that then kind of, it'll take a minute because it needs to go and do its own research before it starts that journey. But it'll then come back to me and ask a bunch of questions like, are you interested in this element of the story, interested in that element of the story? And that will make its way, as you can see here, that will make its way through to a kind of article plan. That article plan, you can either use that plan as just a point of beginning to write from scratch, or you can use it to draft the article entirely. You can, again, equally just write your own elements in this plan rather than going off what the AI has discussed. And so this will then start writing. I just chose those at random, and it will then come back to me with a kind of formed plan of what it thinks the article should look like. And I can then go through and say, I actually don't like this section or this quote here. I'd rather have, this quote in that position. And effectively, it just kind of like does all that article ideation process super quickly, and it puts it all in one place, and it lets the editor kind of be in charge of how that feature would be drafted effectively. Beyond that, again, other stuff that I found quite tiresome and like took a lot of energy was like just making social captions for copy. So we kind of made a tool here that just bumps out social images with kind of our logo and with copy on top that's engaging, so we can put that on Instagram just by pressing this button. And we also just thought about, okay, once you've done your drafting, once you've done your editing, does the article actually add anything, or has it just been a derivative of something else that's been published? So that's where we kind of developed this originality test as well. So I'll run that on. So there you can see like social caption generated, ready to go. But if I also think, okay, is this interesting? Is this original enough to go live? This was probably original when it came out, but it's probably not original anymore. But this will then just go and look at like, what's on Google, what other stories are out there, and come back to me with an assessment of the original value of the story. Beyond that, we also have like some other pretty cool tools. Like we have a verification tool that flags anything that's wrong. You have a deep verification tool that goes absolutely crazy and will look at every single bit of every part of the story and triple check it against like two sources to make sure that it's true. And there's a traceable source. And yeah, as you say, this one just said there's a moderate information gain. It's a sort of a vaguely interesting article to run. Let me try to see if I can find a piece that has a flagged. Here we go. Here's an article that says that we can't actually run this because the verification tool's found an error, and it won't let us publish at this point until that's been cleared. So yeah, that's a snapshot of the overall process of the Velora platform. But the goal is really to very much based on editorial decisions, how much you want to automate, to offer an infrastructure that means that you can either say you want to go very much like AI like drafting with humans overseeing it, or you just want to use AI to remove the heavy work of doing some research, doing some news discovery, and actually uploading stuff to a CMS and picking an image. And that was our goal, just to say, let's give the full spectrum of what we think is responsible use. Nothing's kind of auto-published. It still always needs an editor in this platform to be sort of steering it. And we hope that kind of offers a lot of value to kind of a wide remit of different journalists and different content creators.
Yeah, it's a robust platform. I think you and I were talking yesterday about all these, little tools that are just like a wrapper on ChatGPT or something. It does one thing. This is like, you've thought it through. I love, I have this podcast about journalism, local journalism specifically, but I'm also a bit of a business geek. And I love businesses that are founded by people who are solving a pain point. Like, you've been an editor and you're like, oh, if I could build something from scratch, you would do this and this and this and this and this, and all that stuff. Even like the verification tool. I don't know if we talked about that yesterday or if I just missed it yesterday. That's super valuable, to high quality journalism. That it just double checks, triple checks everything against other sources. Very cool. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit, without giving away any proprietary stuff or anything. Yeah, a lot of people are all over the spectrum with AI. Some people, I use ChatGPT sometimes to help me give headline ideas. And some people are far down the rabbit hole, like yourself and myself, I guess. But I thought it was interesting yesterday when you told me that it's kind of calling out to different tools for the different aspects. Is this, I guess the question I have is like, is this stuff you had discovered like at your kind of previous position, like, oh, this tool is best for this is best for that? Or have you guys just been fiddling with it and kind of working on Velora to figure out what works the best? And just talk a little bit about that process of finding that and like kind of how it works on the back end. Is that a simple enough question?
Yeah.
I think I overcomplicated
Yeah, of course.
it.
No, I think like most people, you got like the vanilla ChatGPT kind of like a use case. And that was probably mostly where I was at before I started this project. I did a lot of stuff in ChatGPT. I might have done some really basic Python coding and stuff. And then did a little bit of stuff with Gemini and found that Gemini was better with like, I think one of the use cases we had was that it would, my old work, I just automated some of the uploading to the CMS in a very basic way. I was like, if I put loads of copy into here and ask it to make it into JSON code, will Gemini do that? And it did it really, really well. And the JSON code was able to be copied directly from clipboard onto our front end CMS. And that was like actually a massive time saver. That took say like 15 minutes each time, but that was still just going through and doing the same prompts each time. Doing this kind of, that was a journey of learning about, the fact you can call a tool with a very specific, from code with a very specific system prompt and a very specific prompt that's repeatable. And then that becomes more kind of agentic in nature. And then, you've got the same tool being called for the same job as a result of a sort of like larger orchestration of AI tools. And when you start to do that, you start to notice that some tools are like way better than others at certain jobs. Now, like I've never tried it, but I don't think ChatGPT is in any way a good verification tool because
no,
it will. Yeah, exactly.
Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, I probably have tried it, but it's one of those things that it will fall back on its like training data before it does a search, for instance. And simple things like that, like is your tool calling a search tool itself, and is that going to find information? And if it isn't, then it isn't going to be very good at verification because it's just going on what it knows, and what it knows could be wrong or it could just be outdated. And so you end up realizing that some platforms by nature is innately better. And obviously, like I've given away the crown jewels, but like Gemini is definitely something that is better at searching because it is owned by Google. It's got ground search built into the platform, so anything that involves search, whether it's verification or like an initial research, Gemini is going to be better at. And then beyond that, you kind of get into the point of like, well, which tool is best within the Gemini suite at this point in the kind of like the pipeline? Do you want a really expensive reasoning tool to do this, or do you want something that does it really quick? It's like you just specifically said to do a search and confirm something. And that's really something that, again, I wasn't really conscious of before I started this. But lots of AI tools, like, for instance, RA tool that populates the CMS is a very simple job to do. It has to understand what bits of copy need to be put into what bits of the CMS. But it still is useful to have an AI tool understand that. But it's a very, very simple, very, very quick bit of LM kind of like processing. And so that needs a very small model. So kind of a large part, probably the biggest part of all, well, certainly actually we audited it a few weeks ago, certainly the biggest part of all of our kind of LLM use is very small models being used for very, very targeted jobs. And again, that's partly cost, partly time, but lots of reasons, but also they're just innately better at it. If you give a really big reasoning model a really simple task, it often won't actually do as well as a really small model might do on that same task. It kind of might overcomplicate it. It might just take a long time. So yeah, understanding that whole world of different AIs and the different use cases was really interesting, and it really is substantially different. These tools have been kind of designed, obviously, as frontier kind of AIs, but for very different use cases. And I think that bears out when you start trying to point them to different things. So that's been a really interesting learning journey. And I believe that pretty confidently that we have the right AI tool in each slot to do each job. And, maybe you could just use Claude for all of it, but I think you'd probably end up spending more, and it would also generally the output would be less good. So yeah, that's kind of a big part of what we do. We're kind of like testers of different models, and when different models come out, we then insert them in and see they do the job better. Opus 4.6 is a good example. We put that into the pipeline when it came out, that Claude's one before 4.7, and a whole bunch of heavy kind of prompt engineering we've been doing to try and make kind of the initial drafting tool do a really good job of drafting an article was suddenly eradicated. We didn't need to do any of that prompt engineering anymore because the Opus 4.6 was so much better. It was just here you go, here's a really good draft and your style. You'd be like, wow, you nailed that. You don't really need to do anything else. It's going to do it basically perfectly each time. And we previously had to really try hard to sort of say, you need to rely on the style of this writer. The style will be, specified in this part of the prompt, but Opus just got it. It was cool. Yeah, here we go. Interestingly, Opus 4.7, by contrast, though, the newer model, we tried the same thing, but we didn't see the same uplift. So it wasn't the same stuff that we didn't really see the value in slotting that back into our pipeline. So yeah, a large part of it is when new models come out, we see if they're applicable and appropriate. And Danny, my co-founder at Technical Side, he's the guy that really is the master of the models and the master of the tech, and he's so drilled down on every single update and iteration, which is really fascinating. But yeah, so that's a whole new world to me, really. But I think the ecosystem of how wide the AI world is really interesting. And then you've also got the whole other world of open source AI tools, things that aren't even kind of Claude or ChatGPT that might be available for lower cost and on kind of infrastructure that you can rent remotely and stuff, but you don't then need to be going to a big cloud service or anything.
Very cool. So you said, this podcast is primarily for local news, local media in the US, but other people from all over publishing listen. I'm curious, you said you've got a couple dozen folks using the product now. I'm curious, is there a profile that they fit, what they are? And if not, if they're kind of all over the place, who's it kind of working the best for? Is everybody seeing the same benefit? What kind of publishers are using it now, and what kind of feedback have you gotten on it?
Yeah, we have a really wide spectrum. It is so differentiated, stuff in the financial space, stuff in the hobbyist space, nature stuff, other sports titles, and then, hyper niche B2B type stuff. And all of them kind of have the same general view that it is just a huge time save. It's going from, turning a 2-hour job into a 20-minute job. And equally, I think probably one of the most interesting outputs from one of our first clients is that they were spending a lot of time and freelancing out a lot of what would be commodity news press release rewrites. And they were able to use the platform to kind of automate a lot of, well, not automate, but speed up a lot of that ultimately, and be able to turn around very low lift, someone posted quarterly results or what have you. And what they then did is actually reinvest the money they had spent and the time they had spent on that into more original, high profile content. So more kind of interview stuff, more analysis stuff. And it sort of changed the profile of what they're doing. So they weren't saving money or necessarily increasing output, but it just changed the amount of resource they could dedicate to the kind of output they want. And it was just a case, let's spend more analysis. So let's try and add more to our site that makes it differentiated and unique. And I think, that might sound like it's kind of just very wishful thinking, but I think in the way that the landscape's changing for, Google and general content, I actually think that's kind of what's necessary. If you remove that low lift stuff that can be automated, you really should do, because if you can't add to it and it takes you a long time, you're going to get beaten by people that will automate it, is my kind of quite harsh view on it. But I think it's a case of thinking, okay, you as a creative, you as a subject area expert, what can you really add and how can you spend more time doing that kind of stuff? You probably have some of the best knowledge in the world in your sector. Spend your time focusing on that and really trying to give that to your audience, rather than just saying a press release has come out, I'll spend 2 hours rewriting that and uploading it to a CMS. So that's kind of the result. And I think that was one case. Another time that probably predominantly the writer and the editor writer was able to just make more news content for their audience, but not like a huge amount, but it might have gone from like 2 or 3 news stories to like 10 news stories a day, and that served that person's audience much better, and they saw a big traffic uplift as a result of that. So yeah, I think a lot of cases we've just been kind of people removing the grunt work and being able to not really fundamentally change their content strategy, but just see like a bit of a shift that gave them more time, gave them more space, and probably ultimately kind of less cost, here or there, but equally an opportunity to reinvest that elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's the best case. Every time I come up against I don't know, doomerism or skepticism around AI, that's always my take is free it should, if when used properly, can free up so much time. It's like for local news, a new local news outlet or something like that. It's just it frees you up to do the stuff that matters. And your
Yeah.
expertise, like you're saying, stuff like that. Very cool, man. I had these bullet points, but we kind of covered everything I had in it. I think it's a really good kind of takeaway on the overall platform. What do you want to? Is there anything I missed? First of all, do you want to get out there? I think we did a pretty good job of profiling it, how it works, who it's for, what it does. But what else? Is there anything else I missed?
No, I think it kind of covered everything. I think, we're still exploring, like, we still want to know where this goes. And I think, I don't know. It's obviously, as you say, there's a lot of like controversy and it's a sensitive topic, and I can understand why. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's healthy for like everybody as analysts to start thinking. I know it's really intimidating to have firstly like a whole landscape where people are automating content, and often automating it really irresponsibly or maybe plagiaristically. But I think it's better. This whole thing will work better, and I think there'll be a better future of journalism if journalists and super users themselves are the ones that kind of help invent the future of what this trade looks like. Because my view has always been that publishers kind of useful at monetization, but aren't always super good at like the actual content journey. And so if they're the ones that are trying to introduce, AI tools, that'll probably be one of those enterprise AI use case adoptions that never really works. But I think, we as journalists, the problems are kind of obvious, but actually now the solutions are quite straightforward. So there's so much opportunity to automate in ways that are productive. But, and, for the writing point, I think you're right. I think that good journalism, I don't think it's ever been really, it's often been sort of identified by being writing, and the actual act of writing. But I think if we really look at it, it's not what has historically made content in journalism good. I think it's angle, insight, judgment, and an eye for a story. So I really hope that maybe AI can actually put that back in the center court. You don't have to spend a lot of time, trudged in like a lot of manual work, a lot of like writing that might be quite repetitive. But yeah, I'm certain that listening to this, many people will be kind of, randomly like wriggling with anger at these sentiments. But I think I honestly believe it's optimistic, and I think there's a future where automate the low hanging stuff, automate the easy stuff, focus on what's really interesting, what's really value add.
Yeah.
Maybe one thing I'd say actually we didn't cover is just like how a local newspaper could use the platform.
Right. I missed my own question. Sorry. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think, probably the one thing that the news discovery tool does that, a Google News Alert does or doesn't do, or like an RSS feed doesn't do, is that increasingly you just end up with so much information about a topic. Like you might have like 1,000 sources an hour of something that's related to your beat. And what kind of we worked out how to do is just a sort of like semantic kind of tracking of like what is different and what is interesting. And that's actually quite a big technical challenge. You can't just say to, an AI later, here are all the stories, which one's the most interesting. You kind of day to day, you have to have a way of understanding this story has been covered. This story is actually the same as that story. This story might look the same, but is actually distinct. So I think for a local news beat, you could have a whole heap of coverage from international news from lots of stories, but you could just hone in and say, if this is about my area of interest, if this is about West London kind of parenting, I want it to be sent for my attention in my newsfeed. And that's kind of what this platform is very good at. Just in terms of saying this is what's relevant to you, and some of that is something we offer as a totally separate kind of product offering. We don't have to have the AI drafting. It can just be identifying like what is interesting for your audience in terms of news discovery service. And beyond that, I think all the other stuff that local news I hope could use it for is just to, I'm sure a lot of local newspapers get a trillion press releases and just saying like, okay, well, which of these press releases is actually interesting, and why don't we just get some drafts up so we can like have a look at what it looks like as a story and a draft that's already done its research to understand if it's something that actually is new or it's something that is related to another kind of press release we received or another piece of news. So I hope those are areas that local news might be able to find it interesting, but we haven't actually got like a huge amount of local news trialists. So I'd be really interested to see what it's like for folks in that area. But I think probably the general challenge is going to be the same as a B2B area where you're just like hyper specialized in like, heating and ventilation or something, and then you've got a whole bunch of sources, and you're like, no, I just want to know about the heating and ventilation stuff, and that's kind of where we have seen a lot of really good success. Not specifically with heating and ventilation, but that is like where the platform kind of is very effective.
Yeah, I had a guy on the podcast recently. They own a bunch of B2B publications, and I'm shocked by the specificity that you can get. He said they recently acquired a magazine, I think, that's powered window coverings, and it just covers that. So like if you go to like a fancy hotel and there's some blinds and you have a remote and they'll lower or raise, it's a publication just for that. I had no idea. Anyway, you can get down in the weeds on this stuff is the point I'm getting at. All right, Peter, you said you haven't had a huge group of local people reaching out. Say people listening to the show are interested and get in touch with you. What should I link to? Where can they find you? Where can they find Velora? What do you want me to link to or put out there?
Yeah, well, our actual editorial website is just if they're interested, is called Velora Cycling. But our business site is velora.build, so velora.build. And my email address is peter@velora.build, and you'll see my email address on the website. But it has a bit more information there about the platform and how to use it. And we're like me and Daddy are very accessible. And if anyone listening to this and just wants to know more or wants to try it or thinks, hey, I don't really like the specific way that you guys do it, but I'd be really interested in if it could be turned to this particular application. We're really open to all ideas at this point, and we're young in our journey, and we're kind of eager to adapt and learn and kind of like work with people that are like interested to like see what this kind of tech is able to do.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully some people will listen and maybe they'll be interested, and that's good to hear. I love that mentality too of let's work with it. Let's figure out what works. Peter, thanks so much. Thank you so much, man. This was great, and have a great almost evening there. It's morning here, but it's got to be late afternoon there, mid-afternoon. So you have a good day. Amazing. And thanks for coming on, man.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. Yep.